All right, so just a little bit about the kind of background where we're coming from. So for ped and bike projects in the capital program, we have two main funding sources. One is the transportation tax, 419. That will provide an estimated $29 million over the 21-year life of the tax. But in the first 5 years, it will provide $12.8 million for ped and bike projects. Our second source, and I think some of you have heard this before, hopefully all of you, but Mountain Line was granted a federal grant called First Mile, Last Mile. It is a total of $6.9 million. Of that $6.9 million, 5.5 is the federal grant, and 1.4 is the local match. So that 1.4 comes out of that $12.8 million above, and that's really our total what we're working with over the next 5 years for ped and bike projects. It's probably a good time to mention, Trevor said at the beginning of his presentation that a lot of the capital projects that we just went through include some pretty significant ped and bike components, and I think that's worth mentioning again. And they were described in good detail as each project came through. But these are really projects that are crucial to our overall ped and bike networks, and really projects that we are unable to move forward on our own. I mean as a ped bike project. For example, we have identified the bike lanes along Butler as a priority for more than a decade, but it was really a project that we were unable to take on ourselves and add those bike lanes. So now that the roadway project moves forward, we get really good bike facilities, and it closes that gap and meets that need. Very similar with the downtown mile. We have a couple of underpasses. The Florence Walnut we've had funded and designed for a number of years, but because of railroad restrictions and requirements, we were unable to move forward on that on our own. The downtown mile makes it possible for us to do that as well. So I think that's important. And really, when we think about implementation of ped and bike projects at an infrastructure level, there are kind of three legs to the stool. One of them is the capital program for ped and bike projects in and of itself, which we're going to cover in the next couple of slides. The second one, of course, is the bigger capital projects that we have, like the Rio to Flag, the downtown mile, Lone Tree Overpass, that, like I mentioned, fills in significant portions of our network. And then the third one is development review, so private development. And we really need to rely kind of equally on those three things to help us build complete networks. So we're always kind of in the loop and watching as projects progress to make sure that we're getting our ped and bike infrastructure that's built as part of that. And more recently, with the council's help, we're getting really, really good ped and bike facilities compared to, say, 15 or 20 years ago. So we're upping our game. That's really exciting. So if you go to the next slide, for here, I just wanted to give you an idea, because I know there are some new members of the council, but we've gone through kind of a long process to identify the projects that we want to build and then to prioritize them. So it's kind of spelled out here. We started a while ago with inventories of what we have and what's missing. We tried to develop the idea of complete networks. We've broken into a couple different categories for ped and bike, sidewalks, bikeways, foot trails, and then a couple types of crossing. And we've been talking about this at the Transportation Commission and the ped and bike committees for a number of years. The actual formal prioritization process is kind of outlined a little bit there on the right. We took an account of attractors and generators. So what are the things that make people more likely to walk or bike, or things that they're more likely to walk or bike to, social factors, and then kind of need and functionality. This is a bit of an oversimplification, but that's the general outline of it. All of it, the process and the projects that we identified and their priorities are included in the Active Transportation Master Plan. So if you're really curious, you can go through that document and see how we got to this point. We of course are not done. This gets us to this point where we can start talking about capital projects and making requests and building things, but we need to review this process every few years to make sure that our priorities are still accurate and adjust as necessary.
Lauren,
Yes.
this is the right framing. And I know we're not talking about maintenance, but when you talk about inventories and stuff on bike and ped paths, like I live off Lake Mary Road and I go up Lone Tree, and the asphalt bike and ped paths are got all these bumps on them, zippers, and so people like on Lone Tree, we've never seen someone on a bike on that path. They're on the road, which doesn't have a bike lane because it's so it hasn't been maintained. So is that part of the master plan, to the stuff that we've already built, to maintain it so it's used, or just we have it built, so we say that we have it built because people are getting off those paths because they're so bad?
Yeah, no, you're correct. That path is in bad shape. So three levels of answer to the maintenance question. First, we're doing our best to build projects that require less maintenance. So we may spend a little bit more up front on them, but hopefully the return is that they're more maintenance free. Like David mentioned, the Schweitzer Canyon project, that is more expensive than usual because we have a lot of drainage concerns, and we want to take care of that now so they don't become a problem later. So that's one level. The second level is we're starting to look at some capital funding to address persistent or ongoing maintenance problems. And in fact, we'll see in a couple of slides that we're starting to set aside money to specifically address asphalt trails, because that's becoming kind of an issue. We also have another piece in the budget that addresses kind of spot improvements, and those can be enhancements, but we also intend for them to correct issues, drainage issues, erosion, other surface issues along trails and other places where we know there are problems, and they're going to require a little bit more money to fix ahead of time. And then the third part is a little bit more esoteric, but it is really thinking about how we do maintenance of ped and bike facilities, and kind of taking that back down to base level and thinking about how we can do it more efficiently. If it takes additional resources, if we should do it differently. Some parts of it relate to how we collect information and how we go about prioritizing things. So that's kind of the final step. Also worth doing, but sometime in the future. We recognize, I think it's been pretty clear council priority for the last couple of years, that we want to be able to maintain the facilities that we have. And your example that people aren't using that trail is significant. That tells us that there's an issue there, right? We have a facility and it's not.
It doesn't make sense to build more of the same. People over a couple of years aren't going to use those new ones because we're not maintaining them. It's one thing to build that space, but then it's got to be usable.
I figured it was the grade of that portion. If I'm thinking the same part of the woods that's along Lone Tree by the college.
Lake Mary Road too, that has the same issue and the same solutions that people, and I taught them, not every day, but I'll say, hey, why are you on the street? And the complaint is always, it's just too dangerous on the path.
Yeah. Our immediate response to that, the issue with asphalt trails, is we stopped building asphalt trails a couple of years ago and took it out of our engineering standards.
Good.
For whatever reason, they just have not held up well. And we have, I think 9 miles of existing roads that we'll need to address. You're welcome.
Glad to hear that.
Okay. So here we dive into what's actually in the capital budget, and we start with the general category. General planning item in the capital budget includes some staff time. This is part of my position as well as an engineering tech in the transportation section. I know that there has been discussion, and you'll see more of it, about additional positions in transportation related to active transportation. This line item is not them. That is a different discussion, and I think that's coming up in
April.
Well, April retreat.
Later in April.
Later in April, yeah. So that's what do we call it? Is that the operational budget versus this is the capital budget?
It will be in follow-up. It's going to be part of a big discussion about organizational staffing. We'll call that one out for a particular discussion with council, because we know it's of high interest, and we look forward to having that discussion.
Okay. Thank you, Greg. I just wanted to be clear that these positions are something different than that conversation. The next bullet is for project pre-design, and this is fund that we have set aside to do concept plans or 15% plans for some of the more ambitious ped bike projects that we have. The idea is to get a little bit more information about how they might work, what right-of-way or easements we would need, if there are constructability issues, and what they might cost. And that information gets us a little bit further down the line with implementing those projects and really sets us up to take advantage of grants when they become available. So, for example, we've spent some of that money in the past year on pre-design or concept plans for protected intersections along Butler, at Beaver, in San Francisco. And we have another slide, I think, that's coming up right after to talk about that in more detail. And we've got a couple of years of funding in that, and we'll try to draw that down as much as possible, and then see after that if there are still opportunities to use that money. Third bullet point is for a Vision Zero action plan. So a planning effort to look at a safe streets or a Vision Zero concept. And then the last one is actually a live link to our online planning map. And I'm going to skip that for now, but come back to it after the rest of our presentation on projects. So if you go to the next slide, that is the one on, this is the one on the project pre-design that we've worked on so far. So we're wrapping up the concept plans for the 2 protected intersections. We're just beginning work on taking the bike lanes along Butler and moving the curb and raising the bike lanes up to the level of sidewalk. You can see here the bike lane. The bike lane is at street level now, but this curb would move out and the bike lane would get raised. And that extra vertical change provides some level of protection for bicyclists and eliminates a good number, not all, but a good number of those issues that we've been having with the current configuration of separated bike lanes.
Can I ask a question about that? How would that impact snow removal, and would it, I'm guessing it would make it easier, but if it's still raised, what does that do in terms of plows and moving that snow and then sweeping up cinders?
Yeah, one of the reasons that we settled on this configuration, not only here, but on other road projects as well that you heard from some of the previous presenters, is that it gives us 11 or 12 feet of concrete that can be relatively easily plowed. Like we have the equipment, we have the know-how to plow those facilities. So that kind of addresses the issue with Butler now, where we need a specific piece of equipment to fit into that tight space. Now we can do this with a pickup truck or a front-end loader. There remains an issue of where the snow gets stored once it gets plowed off this facility. But if you think about the Butler corridor, there are actually some landscape areas that the city purchased as part of the right-of-way way back then. And so one of the things we want to look at in the concept planning is, can we use those areas more efficiently to create parkways and other places to store that snow, so we help eliminate that issue. On new construction, we should have parkways and a place to store that snow as part of initial design. So we're kind of addressing it.
And do we currently have the funding to do this?
Maintenance-wise?
No, construction-wise.
No, we don't. Part of the, we know we have the cost estimates for the 2 protected intersections, about $1 million each in round figures. I don't know what the raising the bike lane will be. We'll get that cost as part of the estimate. It'll be more than $1 million, probably. However, there's lots of federal grant money available now. There are specific programs that we've been looking at that might be good candidates for this project. This project might be a good candidate for those grants. I'm optimistic.
And can I narrow you down a little bit, because Butler has been so problematic for bike and ped for so long. And it's a topic that everybody talks about. Optimistically, when do you think we could actually see this coming into the construction stage?
So this is a really good discussion, and how are we doing time-wise?
I need to pick it up.
Maybe some very quick feedback from council as to how you would view this as a priority. It is not currently funded. We have an idea of costs. You're getting an array of projects today that are very highly prioritized, but we don't want to take away the conversation from these projects, which have been the subject of a lot of email communications of late, and I know the interest is high, but perhaps some quick feedback from council would be appropriate if that's okay.
I'll just start it off saying with all the projects that are being built off Butler, you know, the traffic and the issues are just going to increase quite rapidly with housing construction and everything else. You know, it just seems like this would be one of our top projects, I would think.
Just last night, I sat through about an hour and a half of discussion on this exact subject at the bicycle committee meeting. And my thoughts are that there seems to be a strong consensus from staff that the system we're having now with the curbs and the candlesticks or whatever they're called is not working. It's very inefficient, maintenance-wise, and a significant thing I picked up on last night, Mark was there, of course, sitting across the table from me, was that if we keep the candlesticks, the current setup right now, the maintenance costs per year are very significant. So to me, that translates to if we could do the project where we raise the bike lane up to the sidewalk level, that would actually save a lot of money in the long term because we wouldn't have to do all that very expensive and very frustrating maintenance and snow removal. So in my mind, that's a reason to move this up. Now, there's been a lot of pressure to do the Butler project and also the protected intersections at Beaver and San Francisco. In my mind, I think we should push the Butler, raise the bikeway project up as a higher priority. In other words, if we only have so much money, spend the money on Butler first, and then not do the protected intersections yet. Maybe do them, but certainly the Butler project is higher priority. So that's kind of my thoughts on this. If we can if we could find some funding to do the Butler project, that would really be efficient. The bicycle committee, by consensus last night, felt very strongly that they don't want to just take out the candlesticks and put it back to, an open street with a white line or whatever, that they want to keep that the way it is until we can do the bike lane up. So in my opinion, this all boils down to, let's see what we can do to do the final project, save the money on maintenance, and maybe save some money by not doing the protected intersections right now and put Butler as the high priority. Does that kind of make sense, or questions?
I think it makes sense.
Thank you.
I can follow up on that. I hate to admit that, Councilmember Matthews, when you started talking, I thought you were going to conclude the opposite than you did. And I really deeply apologize for that. I was very excited to hear the conclusion that you came to. I think it follows closely with what Councilmember McCarthy's saying. I remember being in the very interesting position of sort of being the tie-breaking vote on whether or not we keep those lanes in place for an additional 6 months. And I felt it was important to do so because I think something like that needs room to breathe, and people need time to get over their knee-jerk reactions and their preconceptions and experience the amenity for what it is through a variety of seasons and contexts. I don't think those candlesticks were working at the time. I thought the experiment needed more time to be conclusive. I come to the same conclusion that I don't think they're working. This alternative solution is incredibly exciting to me. and we should definitely make it a priority. I don't know that we need to rob Peter to pay Paul in terms of getting rid of the protected intersections to prioritize this. There's probably a little bit of that, a zero-sum game of having to choose. But I mean, these are all synergistic and they play off of each other. I don't think it's possible to create the protected intersection after the fact. So it kind of needs to be baked into the cake. In the way that these integrated bike paths should have been baked into the cake originally. And it's a major thoroughfare. I think it's a nice way to transition from a very open-minded and, curious, good faith experiment that wasn't working, and pivot into a solution that makes everybody really excited. That's a nice win for everybody. And it'd be nice to be able to have the contrast of the experiment and the solution on people's minds as quickly as possible.
If I may, you have a discussion on the bike pilot project, the bike lane pilot project coming your way relatively soon. But thank you for the input. So we'll have more on that topic. And I know the two relate, and in fact, they're almost inseparable to have that discussion and not talk about alternatives, which we're looking at. I'm hearing from council what we thought we would all hear. There's a desire to make this a priority and allow us at the budget team roll up our sleeves and get at this. I'm seeing heads nod yes. Thank you for that discussion. Editorial here. This is the fix. The bike pilot project was an experiment, and we'll have space to talk about the good and bad from that experiment. But this is the fix. And I can only underscore everything Martin said. Is safer, but it's maintainable, and it's maintainable without having to expend enormous sums of money on specialized equipment and utilizing existing equipment and quite arguably clearing things just as fast as we're clearing the vehicular roadway, because it really is no different. You're just 6 inches higher operating. We won't be out there with road graders. Public Works would like to do that, but we will, be able to maintain that, I think, in a much more efficient manner. Looking forward to the discussion. Thank you.
And Martin, just incidentally, according to your diagram, I think 22 travel lanes is way too many.
This is a little foot, yeah.
I think
Meters, feet, what do we measure?
Okay.
Thank you.
Stupid joke.
Just finish off by commenting on Vice Mayor Adam Shimoni spent hours discussing with me this elevated bike lane concept, right? We agreed on this over a year ago, so it was already well decided.
Thank you for your thoughts. Just going to conclude that, I hate to be that person, but we're missing a piece of information so far, which is what this will cost. And I said before that it's going to be over $1 million. That's classic understatement. I'm sorry, I shouldn't have said it that way. It's going to be millions of dollars to do that. And I think an important part of our conversation is what that actually is. So as we work through the 15% plans, we'll have better information, and we will need that, right, to be able to prioritize and know what we can afford and what needs to be moved, et cetera.
Can I comment to that? So the next step, of course, is to do the cost estimate, which agrees with what you're saying. But to put this in perspective, the Lockett Cedar roundabout is going to cost $5 million. And I think this project actually makes more sense than that. Not that we're going to trade one or the other, but just to put it in perspective of what the costs are. I think the thing that really pushed me over the edge on making my recommendation is when I saw at the meeting last night what the cost is to maintain the candlesticks and the curbs, how much it's going to cost each year. And this doesn't even cost, I'm not talking about snow removal. I'm just talking about what it's costing us to replace the damaged candlesticks and the damaged curbs.
And just settle claims.
Yes, so the amount of cost per year, as long as we still have this approach, that's what pushed me over the edge. It's like, it's a big waste of money. So admittedly, if you only look 1 year ahead, it makes more sense to keep the candlesticks financially. But if you think of it in terms of, say, 5 years, it doesn't make sense at all. And I tend to think of things in the long term. I have long-term goals as opposed to short-term goals. So that's why I'm kind of hard over on this. Thank you.
And I don't want to be misunderstood as saying the experiment wasn't worthwhile.
No,
conversely, quite the opposite. I think it was invaluable. And it allows us to move forward with something more robust and a better solution, knowing that we've tried other more economical possibilities.
It reminds me of a quote out of Ed Abbey's book, Desert Solitaire. It can always serve as a bad example.
Thank you for the discussion. I know I got us off track, but this was a very important discussion, so thank you.
Absolutely. And Martin, do you have the information you need? I'm hearing from council to make it a priority in the budget moving forward. So Martin has about 6 or so more slides related to other bike and ped projects. So I'd ask you just kind of hit the highlights of those slides moving forward.
Of course, thank you. We can move on. So the rest of it kind of breaks out our projects by category. And so we'll go through them fairly quickly. And please, if you have questions about a particular project, let me know. And I'm happy to answer that. I will point out on the foot slide that we do have asphalt repair. We've put it in the capital budget, I think at $400,000 for every year. It's really not enough to fix some of these trails like we need to, but it's enough to get us started. And I think that's an effort we'll have to undertake in terms of deciding how we're going to fix them, which ones are a priority, and how we're going to pay for that. So that's really kind of to come. And I will say one other thing about foot trails. 5 years ago, we made this presentation to council. Most of our ped bike program was just foot trails, and that was pretty much it. And, that worked pretty well. And now we have all kinds of other facilities that we're talking about. And we're really moving in a lot of new directions, and that's very exciting. But foot trails remains back there as one of our more popular, well-used facilities, and really they're recreational, but they're also a crucial part of our transportation system. So that's kind of my pitch to don't take the foots for granted. Let's remember that that's important as well. So with that, we'll move on to sidewalks. And the only thing I'll mention here is that we don't have a lot of sidewalks listed in this part of the budget. This is the part that's funded through 419, but a few slides later, we're going to talk about first mile, last mile. There's a lot of sidewalk projects listed there. So that's kind of how that funding got broken out. Next slide is on crossings. And this is sort of the same, the enhanced crossings. We only have one listed here, but we have a number of crossings that we're working on as part of first mile, last mile. 2 grade separated crossings. The money for the Florence Walnut underpass we've had for a number of years. As I mentioned, we just haven't been able to build it. So downtown mile helps us move that forward. And these tend to be very impactful projects in terms of getting people out on foot and on bike, but they're also very expensive. So we need to be careful, but these are also opportunities for us to look for grants and other ways to pay for them. Moving on to bikeways.
Can you say more about the bow and arrow tunnel?
Oh, yes, I'd
Do you have
be
a
happy
map on
to.
that, or it's probably not possible for you to pull something like that up, but just describe it more.
This is in Bone Arrow Washes behind the Community College Lone Tree campus. And Juniper Point is a private development that is going to develop really on both sides of that canyon, that wash. As part of their development, they're going to do 2 things. One is build new Lone Tree Road over that wash, and 2 is build a foot trail along that wash.
Is that where the sledders go? that the same?
The bottom of the hill, yes.
Yeah,
Yes, exactly.
yeah, further, if you take that canyon further back east is where this is located. So when they do those two things, build that road, build that foots trail, we want to have a grade separated crossing for that foots trail underneath that road. And we can't by right ask them to do that as part of development. So we're providing them some money to do it when it happens. It's much more economical to do it now than to try to go back and retrofit a tunnel.
Amazing, great.
Yeah, and I think that's going to be a really nice trail, and I think it will be much better if we have a grade separated crossing versus requiring people to cross that lone tree.
Love it.
Bikeways is the next project category, and here a lot of our work is focused on pavement markings and striping and signing. And it's hard to describe all the projects that we have under the category of bikeways, but think of it as we're really trying to complete an entire system that is cohesive and comprehensive and complete as much as possible. So we're filling in little pieces here and there and trying to make it something that really hangs together nicely. And so there's a whole bunch of projects, way too many to mention or to list individually, but that's our overall goal. There's also a significant component of bikeways under the first mile, last mile. So we'll go to that next. And I think in the capital budget, there are only two entries for first mile, last mile, and they are pedestrian projects and bikeway projects. And the amounts that are listed is our match requirement that should add up to $1.4 million over the life of that grant. But for the next couple of slides, I just wanted to give you where some of these projects are located and what we're working on. So you can see with sidewalks, there's a fairly good number. The next page, we have more crossings. And then on the final slide, we have a number of bikeways. And we're working very closely with Mountain Line. They gave us a lot of latitude, really, in what projects we selected, but we wanted to make sure that there was a connection to transit, that we were helping to enhance connections to transit. And really, that wasn't difficult at all. There's a lot of overlap between that goal and our goal of completing our networks. We have a designer underway on that project. They're just beginning to work on the initial concept plans. I don't know that we'll be able to build anything. We may be able to stripe some bikeways this summer, but we're working towards the construction season after that.
Martin,
Yes.
do you have a map of all of these?
I do, and I was gonna go actually try a live demonstration of that map, but I think I'll just leave it as a link. So if you go back to one of the early slides,
Oh, where you said that there was a live link.
yeah, if you click that, it will bring up an online map, and that lists all the sidewalks missing and existing, foots trails, crossings, bikeways. There's also options to let you know what their priority is. So it's listed by level of priority. And then there's an option to show them based on when we think they'll be constructed. So it's broken into the first 5 years, the next 20 years, and then beyond 20 years. So those categories. And then so you can get an idea of what our priorities and what we're intending to build. But it's also useful because you can see how these things interact. Like, for example, if I showed you a map of grade separated crossings, some of them just kind of float in space. But if you look at planned foots trails, now those crossings make sense. You can see how they fit into the whole system.
And can you remind me how many of you there are?
I feel like Martin's has become a new unit of measure.
This is outstanding.
It's right behind you there now, Martin.
It is a fantastic database to really drill down on priorities. It's something that Mark's been working with the pedestrian and bicycle advisory committees on to inventory. It is an incredible amount of work. It's a great resource. So when you want to do a deep dive on this and find out what Martin has in mind and going into this budget and plan, have some fun on the link in the GIS database. And I'm sure Martin would be more than happy to walk through any of this with folks as you'd like.
Good question. I know we're short on for him.
Sorry, I'm just gonna as it might be kind of unrelated, but there are a lot of bikers that come up here to train in the summertime. A lot of them from different countries. Do we have conversations with any of those organizations that are bringing people in terms of how to use the road properly?
We never have, no.
Never have.
Yeah, yeah. In fact, there's a thing called the Race Across America, RAM, that goes right through the middle of Flagstaff. So there are racers on the way from Los Angeles to
No,
North Carolina.
these are teams that
Yeah.
come, and most of them are international from, because they live on NAU's campus.
Yeah.
And then they use the roadways, and particularly out down Lake Mary Road
Mhm.
and out down to Sedona on the whatever. I'm just, yeah. I'm just curious as if we ever have any conversations about that. Because that may have some, especially when they're going through the city and some of our trails or bike things. So anyway, just curious.
Or just real quick, on the map, is there an overlay or is it just reference the Rio de Flag, path that, I know there's some areas where we can walk the Rio de Flag corridor. Is that identified in that map, overlay map?
I don't believe so. I think we could add it, because a lot of our foot trails are planned coincide with washes, major washes, including good parts of the Rio. I don't think it's in there, but it could be added.
All right.